Our speaker today, William L. Byrd Jr., will introduce us to the saguaro cactus, a plant that we in the Sonoran Desert know and love in a way that few of us may have really considered in a broader historical context. Byrd graduated from the University of Arizona in history in 1975 and then went on to receive a PhD from Georgetown University. After that, worked for 40 years at the Smithsonian, most of that time as a curator of political history at the National Museum of American History. Byrd retired to Tucson, and one of his first projects was to write about a topic that had first captured his interest upon finding a dog-eared copy of a 1950 Arizona magazine depicting a model perched on a saguaro arm in a used bookstore in Washington, D.C. So after Byrd's talk, I'll be sharing a few slides of works from our collection that have saguaro themes. And then we'll have question and answers, of course, at the end. So please help me welcome Mr. Byrd.
Thanks, Diane, for that kind introduction. I study the history of saguaro cactus images, photos, paintings, postcards, and the history of the way the actual plants moved around the country. They moved about. And I'm also interested in the arts and crafts made from their wooden ribs. And today I'm going to talk about the material culture of the saguaro from the object out, kind of like this fruit harvest pole, which appears in the iconography of the plant for the first time in this 19th century woodcut, when the plants began to be documented, pictured, and described in literature. And most of my examples will be drawn from the book, but not all of them. But first, to make sure we're all on the same page, by iconography, I mean strong visual images, and this is the dog-eared magazine cover that I found. Strong visual images, the pictures that you've been carrying around in your head ever since you were a little kid, and that you can add to anywhere, anytime, particularly in today's visual culture, in which things aspire, well, everything aspires to a certain viral quality. In short, the things that you think about when you think about the American West. The previous photo was a Prada, Fashion Week street photograph of a woman with a saguaro skirt. And this is I think it's the 2016 Coachella Festival. But historically, the saguaro has met a lot of promotional needs, particularly as a symbol of fun in the sun, leisure, and recreation in the American West. And most of what I'll be showing you is specific to Southern Arizona, that is this place. But one of the problems that I attempt to work out is how the saguaro came to public attention far from this place and grew an imaginary range to the point where you might be excused for thinking that it grows throughout the West. Seen on placemats and road maps, for example, in Texas. And then you've seen the little neon saguaro figures blinking off and on in shop windows at Santa Fe, just to name a few kinds of places. See that? So for starters, we'll look at the material of botanical study that established the saguaro's Sonoran Desert habitat. And, and how it quickly became an object of desire. There was almost an immediate interest in acquiring it and transplanting it, seeing where it would grow. And though transplants universally failed, this I would argue contributed to this imaginary range, this imaginative range. And finally, the cactus craft of picture frames, furniture lamps, dioramas made from the saguaro's woody ribs that in their own way advanced the far-flung iconography of the plant. So first, study. These are the herbarium specimen sheets at the University of Arizona Herbarium, which is just across the way there. The postcard on the left pictures what's now the herbarium, and that little building to the lower left, it's still there. But the sheets are distinguished by photos and illustrations that kind of round out the botanical significance of the plant with the pressed plant parts and dimensional things attached to the sheets. And they focus on seeds and flowers, the protective spines. I love this one. It's a spine literally sewn onto the page. And if needed, little tiny boxes that accommodate specimens that can't be pressed flat with a plant press. There are also little history lessons to be learned on almost every page, or in this case, box. Note the overwriting of the old name, Cereus giganteus, which is the original botanical name of the plant, with the new name, about 1908, Carnegie gigantea. And that was named for Andrew Carnegie in an effort to get more money for arid plant study. It's sort of an example of pandering in our time, and it didn't work. But the National Herbarium specimen sheets at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington are comparable with tipped-in photos and illustrations that round out the significance of the plants. Sometimes when the plant clicker goes there we go. In social ways, this sheet, for example, features a real photo postcard picturing newly transplanted saguaros at the Los Angeles depot of the Southern Pacific Railroad. And you can see two men kind of gingerly inspecting the plants, one of them is poking a spine. Other sheets, this one, for example, explains the boot, which is the cavity that's made by, for example, a woodpecker, and the whole callus is up inside the plant. And it's only revealed after the plant dies and the ribs fall away, and you have these wonderful little pieces of fossilized plant tissue. It appears that the museum's botanists made a sheet for almost every picture that crossed their path, like these crustates. It's just a newspaper clipping. They just pasted it right onto a sheet. And many of the familiar names associated with Tucson's desert laboratory contributed photographs. The photo in the upper left corner of the page pictures one of Godfrey Sykes' boys posing in the arms of the plant. And the photo is credited to Daniel McDougall. And it explains that it was taken on an outing with the Smithsonian's J.N. Rose near Tucson in 1908. This sheet pictures flowers along the Rillito, an area largely devoid of saguaros today. So all told, these herbarium collections reflect how rich and varied the plant life of Southern Arizona was at the turn of the century. The material culture surrounding the study of the saguaro includes its original botanical rendering by the artist Mary Emily Eaton, who was an Englishwoman who painted the flowering saguaro from life at the New York Botanical Garden in 1912. Her watercolor wash rendering appeared in Britton and Rose's Cactaceae in 1920, and this is the standard reference work for all time. Moving down the street next door at the National Museum of American History, where I used to work, the documentation of the saguaro gets down to its wooden ribs. This saguaro photograph, framed with saguaro ribs, was part of an exhibit entitled Our Trees and Their Woods. It included, it was like a 1920s exhibit that's just been put away. It hasn't been really seen for years. The collection includes 59 tree photographs, each framed with the wood so pictured. And it was created by William Boucher, a retired Washington, D.C. cabinet maker. The goal, he explained, was simply to display the beauty and utility of trees. So he obtained a saguaro photo from the Forest Service, picturing what was then the largest living specimen at Saguaro National Monument, which is today's Saguaro East. And it's not known how or from whom he obtained the wood for the frame, which is as remarkable for its width as its natural finish. And this is something we'll later see with the rib crafters, the unfinished quality of the job. I want to move now to the desert laboratory on Tumamoc Hill, whose history is most closely associated with the study of plant aridity. The property was acquired for the Carnegie Institution by the Tucson Chamber of Commerce. Construction began in 1903 with the improvement of the road that you can still climb today up to the mesa and the laboratory building. The first resident investigator, botanist William Cannon, documented the property with pictures. Cannon found a fruit harvest pole that had been left for the season. He repurposed it as a corner boundary marker and took its picture. So his find might have been the start of a Tumamoc artifact collection, but no, it was left to a later generation of ethnologists to investigate Tuamoc's visible trail systems, rockwork walls, petroglyphs, and shards. Investigators and their friends who came to Tucson commented on the arboreal quality of the desert that they were not expecting to find. One of them was William Temple Hornaday, who was the director of the New York Zoological Garden, who went on to write a book about the hunting trip he went on with the laboratories Daniel McDougall and Godfrey Sykes. Hornaday celebrated the fact that the saguaro had no apparent value other than to entertain and cheer the desert traveler, as he put it. Before he left Tucson, he ransacked the candy stores in the city for the cactus candy that McDougall had introduced him to, which was not made from saguaros, but it's actually from the pulp of smashed up barrels. Before launching into a consideration of craft and its tangible products, I want to talk about the movement of plants and how the appearance of transplants help grow and shape an ever-expansive and highly imaginative popular range. The Southern Pacific Railroad transplanted columnar saguaros to its passenger stations and hotels from the Monterey Peninsula in California all the way to San Antonio, Texas, which is seen here. And the plants are always exhibited in these postcards and other pictures as prize specimens. And these conspicuous trackside transplants created confusion about the saguaro's Sonoran Desert habitat. The plants routinely died in place, but their pictures might last forever. So many individuals with far fewer resources than a railroad took up cactus collecting. Some people personally ventured into the field. Many traded in the simple pleasures of a succulent on a parlor table, a windowsill, or the local cactus club meeting. This was true here as in England and onto the European continent. Philadelphia nurseryman Albert Blanc advertised cactus collecting as a democratic hobby for all, and he keyed in on the saguaro. Blanc offered Sirius giganteus, king of the cactus family, beginning at 6 inches for $1.50 to 6 feet tall for $50. A woodcut picturing a cactus garden with the central saguaro carried the plant's iconography far and wide. In fact, it resembles the summer cactus garden mounted by the Baltimore, Maryland Cactus Society, which appeared the same year as the catalog. Club members lent their potted plants for the summer. The plants, this is important, that remained in pots. The garden featured rockwork parterres, that's what those are, radiating from a central saguaro. The garden superintendent, who happened to be a Cactus Club member, tended to it and looked after it. And his only job after he put it all at ground level in the pots, he had to cover up the display to protect it from rain. At St. Louis, the philanthropist Henry Shaw turned his estate into a public garden, and this is today's Missouri Botanical Garden. And you see the 2 potted columnar saguaros flank the garden's entrance gate. And Shaw had 150 laborers who moved the plants in and out of the safety of their winter hothouses for the summer. And you can kind of see the plants a little more clearly here and how they're installed. But for those with unlimited resources, the transplantation of large branched saguaros beyond the means of even the most zealous botanical collector yielded to the diesel-powered crane. In the late 1940s, the history of saguaro transplantation culminated with the relocation of the last of 3 massive saguaros to heiress Louise N. Grace's Catalina Foothills home, just known as 11 Arches. The movement of the largest mattress-clad specimen, this was actually a replacement specimen for one that had already died. described as a 350-year-old 20-ton saguaro, became the subject of newspaper features and even a short subject film by Charles Herbert and his wife Lillian. The Herberts founded the Western Ways photo service that issued illustrated feature stories and news articles. They often worked hand in glove with the Tucson Sunshine Climate Club, a booster group to generate publicity designed to attract visitors and new residents to Tucson. And I have to say, we're a lot richer for their collection, which is at the Arizona Historical Society, in which you can study the Herberts' methods, look at their pictures, and read their stories. Reaction to their illustrated features about the movement of the last plant to Grace's mansion came from as far away as England. The Herberts, of course, collected the letters that they received about the article, and then they wrote another story about the reaction that they published in the Arizona Daily Star. One London woman reported the Star, remarked at her feelings after reading the story and looking over the pictures and then glancing at the tiny cactus plant she kept in a small pot on a window ledge. So this really attracted quite a bit of attention. But despite the success and reach of the Herberts' positive cactus publicity, not all was well in Saguaro land. The forest surrounding Tucson became an example of plants so often photographed that their decline could be measured in pictures. And here I'm thinking of the repeat photo projects published in the Changing Mile books. But you can also notice the decline in photos taken over the years that were not necessarily meant to be read in sets. For example, this is a Charles Herbert postcard staged with visiting school teachers, that's the story, at Saguaro National Monument in the early 1940s. And this was one of the most unusually formed specimens in the park. And there were many of these. And this was where William Butcher's Saguaro picture came from. The park and the area around it was filled with droop-armed destination plants. And this plant especially was often photographed for park publicity. The wife of the park superintendent appeared with the plant in Arizona Highways in 1940, and then again on the cover of the park's 10-cent trail guide. So there's no doubt about where this is and where it came from. But by the time this Park Service photo was taken in the fall of 1953, you can notice decline slouching toward the end of its life. The death of the forest plants, particularly ones that suffered from what we would call today loads of attention, led to hand-wringing among the photographers, publicists, and feature writers like the Herberts, for whom the saguaro had become their promotional bread and butter. A Western Ways feature reported the decline as a panic. Publicists had the jitters. Their trademark is tumbling down. The forest was being disfigured by black spots, misdiagnosed as a cactus disease. And you can just imagine all of these plants, they're suddenly getting these spots. What's wrong? A Western Ways feature reported the decline as a panic. Publicists had the jitters. The forest was being disfigured. By the mid-1950s, however, botanists concluded that the plants were not diseased. The spots were simply necrosis, which is the way the plants decomposed and died a natural death. But there were so many of them. So what they also realized for the first time was that the saguaro forest, around which the parks had been made and established, was actually a remarkable bumper crop that dated to the 19th century. Spotty seasonal rainfall and winter freezes of several days' duration had tempered growing conditions since that time. So what's happening, these plants, massive plants around which they built the parks, are now dying off, but things are going back to normal. There's still seedling recruitment going on, and that's pretty much the way it is today. But with the loss of the oldest and largest saguaros grew a new appreciation of the saguaro's life cycle from seedling to the driest of ribs. Perhaps inevitably, the arc of interest begun by study and desire moved to craft, with a windfall of ribs and rib cages drying in the desert. Regardless, it didn't take long for cactus craft to be spun into positive publicity stories that alternated for a while with dark stories about black spots on stricken plants, at least until the botanists figured it out. But stories about the most novel of the cactus crafters neatly fit the requirements of positive travel, uplifting travel and tourism publicity. In 1947, feature articles filled with the photos of Charles Herbert, Ray Manley, and other Tucson photographers appeared in the pages of Holiday magazine picturing cactus products. As William Temple Hornaday had foreseen, a practical use for the saguaro had failed to materialize beyond roofing and fencing. Yet Hornaday and others did not anticipate cactus furniture, lamps, picture frames, and miniature dioramas made from the saguaro's rough and ready wood that was just beginning to be understood as the legacy of the 19th century bumper crop. But before going on to describing the cactus craft in the years bracketing the Second World War, I want to go back to the turn of the century to note some early attempts to turn a profit from cactus wood, and that includes cholla. Perhaps the earliest attempt to routinize the production of cactus curios and furnishings in a factory, the Arizona Cactus Company of Frederick E. White, started out with a line of saguaro rib picture frames and ended up with a diversified line of cactus products, lamps, tables made for the most part of cholla wood. And this, you can see down at the bottom, the number is the accession number, it's not the year. And interestingly enough, White was also one of the government contractors who was called on to repair the Casa Grande ruins when they began to pay more attention to that in 1891. In 1894, White moved his cactus manufacturing company from Phoenix to Florence, closer to the saguaro and cholla wood that he required. Unavailable to water or steam power in the pre-electricity era, White's so-called cactus shop appears to have been a handmade affair with rudimentary milling tools and a jigsaw propelled by a foot treadle. As late as 1921, a reporter new to the story noted that White plans to develop his business into a real manufacturing industry. Novelties of unique design would change, quote, desert waste into a revenue-producing factor and develop an industry that will materially assist in the upbuilding of the state by furnishing employment for many, many workmen. The idiosyncrasies of the wood had its attraction. Cabinet maker R.O. Perry, a talented craftsman from Iowa by way of California, moved to Phoenix in the early 1930s and set to building saguaro furniture that today remains the pinnacle of the art. The saguaro wood that Perry harvested became couches, beds, lamps, bookcases, occasional tables, and a radio cabinet. About 10 times a year, he and a helper harvested saguaro rib cages covering the area from Prescott to Sonora, Mexico. Perry estimated that only 1% of saguaro wood remained standing. That's what he was interested in. He was really interested in the root structure. That is, it had an extensive root system that could be excavated. And of that he could excavate, 10% was usable. But Perry composed in his head the articles that he would create as he harvested the wood. He assembled the parts with screws and a paste used to fill joints and holes. And this furniture is on display at the Pinal County Historical Society up in Florence. And it's just amazing to see this. Like William Butcher, he never applied a finish or a seal of any kind, allowing the wood's natural grain and coloring to show. The finished quality of the build looks a lot like Butcher's trees in their woods frame. So Perry, building a piece at a time from the mid-1930s to the late 1940s, sold saguaro furniture to collectors in Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and the Bahamas. The Arizona Biltmore reportedly had a set, as did American Airlines President C.R. Smith, who furnished his Manhattan ranch house in saguaro style. Desert dwellers who came west for their health and found a redemptive livelihood in cactus craft became a regular feature of Charles and Lillian Herbert's publicity news features. And there's a certain format, there's a formula to this. Each story focused on individual crafters who enjoyed an exceptional degree of autonomy in the sun. self-directed, independent, creative, and for better or worse, self-employed. A Herbert rib crafting story, which may be regarded as typical, documented the late life's work of Herb Wood, a stonemason from Pennsylvania, who moved to Tucson after a years-long recuperation from a back injury. Arriving in Tucson in 1931, he purchased a rock-strewn lot west of town, where he built a one-room house of stone, while he, his wife, and 5 children lived in a tent. With the house completed, little money left over, and no income, Wood went to work building furniture with found saguaro and cholla wood, which was as freely available as the rocks and boulders with which he'd built the house. His unusual creations attracted requests from friends and acquaintances. This is one of Charles Herbert's photos that appeared in the pages of Holiday magazine in 1947. And Wood's wife, as you can see, is the second from the right, christened the furniture Cactocraft. They opened a roadside stand with a workshop on the side, which was next to the service station that he ran. By Wood's own, So Herbert's telling of Wood's story unfolded with carefully composed pictures staged in the desert. So here you see Mr. Wood smoking a cigarette as he cuts down a saguaro rib cage. He knows he's not excavating it to get the root structure like R.O. Perry might have done. And you don't want to do this, no smoking. So, but here he is in one of his advertising postcards, which bears all the hallmarks of a Charles Herbert photo. He's unloading a rib cage from an improbably overloaded mule. And the overloading of these images, just trying to squeeze so much in the frame, that's Charles Herbert. The mule is tended by his son. There's so much going on in here, you can't even, until you start enlarging it, you can't even tell what's going on. Here he's assembling a chair. He's got the cigarette again. He's completing a saguaro rib chair in front of a saguaro rib fence. Note that his furniture is a little more crudely made than R.O. White's was. Hand tools and a gratuitous supply of cholla wood fill the foreground. And here we glimpse his shop. Other photographers commented on Herbert's staging of these photos. Ray Manley, a photographer, actually once worked for Herbert, talked about it. He was like, hey, like Charles built him a little set. This was a kind of a new thing, over-the-top thing. That was done to dramatize the subject. And here's another one, which includes a cholla veneer tall clock, and over Wood's shoulder, you can see shelves lined with his inventory of saguaro and cholla lamps and curios displayed in the sun. By Wood's own account, he appeared in some 700 newspaper and magazine articles. I think Diane's going to show some of those in a minute. Apparently but it all began with the Herberts, who sold stories about him and his Cactocraft furniture to magazines like Popular Mechanics, Popular Science, and Desert Magazine. The rib crafters like R.O. Perry and Herb Wood failed to realize a serial production system for milling saguaros and chollas into furniture. On the other side of town, and on this side of Tucson, the manufacture of cactus curios and souvenirs from cholla wood came pretty close to making this kind of a routine thing, stamping this stuff out. Carlos and Barbara Velasco, the founders of Cactus Craft of Arizona, backed into business when Barbara Velasco sought to replicate a cactus lamp that she'd seen made by Native American craftsmen. The Velascos opened a shop in a garage and went into lamp production around 1948. The Velascos did a great business in unassembled lamp kits, the better to pack flat as souvenir purchases. The company sold assembled lamps at a premium. Their fans included Gene Autry, who furnished the Velascos with a list of magazines for their use in advertising. While the lamps were cholla, the backlit Kodachrome shades pictured saguaros more often than not in night and daytime scenes on alternate sides of the shade. The Velascos acquired their color transparencies with reproduction rights from Charles Herbert and Western Ways, although these are actually Pete Balistrero photos. Here's a Herbert photo sequence behind the scenes at their factory store. And you can catch a glimpse of the Velasco's workers assembling the product in the back there. And here, Carlos inspecting the wiring on a covered wagon lamp. And on the right side of the table, examples of different styles of Jean Autry shades. And finally, the retail side, picturing Barbara Velasco showing a Tucson winter visitor, and that's got to be a winter visitor in that coat, showing their store display of finished lamps with waxy parchment paper shades strung with gimp, bearing saguaros and prickly pears, and of course the postcard racks filled with similar scenes. Some Choya pieces have turned up with a Robert Petley tag. Petley was a Phoenix-based photographer and a prodigious producer of Kodachrome postcards in Arizona and all over the Southwest. But my favorite of all is the Guy Wellington Knopf family. And this is another one of Herbert's desert success stories. The picture is the cactus craft of the Guy Wellington Knopf family, sent to sunny Arizona for his health in the depths of the Depression. Guy Knopf landed in Tucson, desperate for work. He began making miniature desert dioramas framed under glass with saguaro ribs. And here Herbert poses the Knopf family in the comfort of their Tucson living room, with Guy Knopf on the right, his wife Mary on the far left, and their 3 adult children in between, each engaged in producing a miniature desert diorama in 3 dimensions. And in Herbert fashion, he crams them all in on the wall and the mantle at the right. And though each diorama may appear to be similar, no two were alike. The dioramas featured curved cardboard shells, which is the kind of thing you might cut from a sort of large mailing tube, with tiny clay saguaro figures baked onto wire that was sort of the consistency of a coat hanger, natural grasses, a hand-painted sky, and a mountain backdrop with a road receding into the foothills of the Santa Catalinas. The forced perspective of the landscape in the concave shell, the narrowing road, the saguaros, and the mountains rendered a panoramic desert scene in 3 dimensions, framed under glass with saguaro ribs. Like their fellow rib crafters, the Knopfs constructed a livelihood with found materials. Charles Herbert followed the family into the desert to document the production process with the obligatory cutting and loading of ribs. You can also note the bushel baskets in which they collected grasses. Herbert photographed the final stages of diorama production in his own backyard rib ramada, where he posed family members hard at work painting and populating the shells. And you can see there again grouped and displayed at the rear of the ramada. They were finished to a height of 6 to 8 inches, but they ranged in length from 6 to 20 inches. A pleasing effect was achieved despite the fact that all but one of the Knopfs was colorblind. They sold their dioramas, it's true. They sold, but which one? Don't know. They sold their dioramas to department stores and gift shops as the Desert Landscape View Company on Stone Road. And at the time of Guy's death in 1947, they had completed 50,000 dioramas. In 1956, his widow Mary sold the company to Home Crafters of Tucson, which supplied work to the handicapped. In the course of her life, the total by 1956 came to 80,000 dioramas. So at this point in my talk, you may be wondering, well, Larry, so what? The answer lies in the saguaro's importance as an icon, a meme, if you will, of desert living. You have to have it. The saguaro pulls all the strings together, all the threads, unlike my stuck pages, and around which life revolves. And you have to have had it for a very long time. In the larger historical scheme of travel and tourism promotion, the saguaro was deemed effective, and its effect was furthered and extended by cactus craft, the photo features about it, and the objects themselves. The post-war leaders of Tucson Sunshine Climate Club posing on their Saguaro rib counter at their downtown headquarters in 1955, felt it was effective. Yet some rank and file club members had long complained about so-called climate-only publicity that excluded industry. In 1945, for example, club member Lee Epperson, the president of Leeson Steel Products, returned his club membership card with a complaint. Quote, "We cannot raise a family, maintain a home, and support churches and schools on sunshine alone." Poking a hole in the novel subjects of the Herbert's photo features, Epperson concluded, "It's doubtful if all the cactus candy, desert furniture, buttons, and beauty clay in the world was made in Tucson, it would give employment to more than a handful of people." Epperson had a point. The club's representation of desert life crammed every symbol into the frame of advertising except work, but as a work of imagination, not unlike the Saguaro's ever expansive and imaginative mental range, making and filling the frame of advertising was the work. Epperson's complaint misunderstood the imperatives of the larger campaign, a carefully constructed fantasy that offered an escapist reality completely divorced from everyday life in urban industrial workaday America. It was left to others to develop a countervailing extractive iconography of mountains that looked like saw blades and interlocking gears that bled off the page without a saguaro in sight. In the late 19th century, study and discovery represented by the fruit harvest pole and the herbarium sheet yielded to the movement and display of plants and the promotion of arts and crafts made from the driest of ribs. So when you run across a rib cage or a picture of one, stop for a moment and think about the arboreal desert it represents, not as so many souvenir lamps, dioramas, knickknacks, and curios, but as the legacy of the 19th century bumper crop. But let's not leave it with dried ribs in the desert. Saguaro iconography is nothing if not an expression of a very human relationship with the plant. Looking back on pictures of people posed with the saguaro, we can see and imagine our most imaginative and curious selves. We express ourselves, we take stock and care in a saguaro moment. Now, since I wrote those closing lines for the book, I realized that it's the other way around. What's really going on in this iconography is that these plants touch us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Larry. One of the really important things about saguaro cactus, of course, is its central role in the life of our neighbors of the autumn and other indigenous people of our region. And so what I'm going to do right now is show a few examples of arts and crafts and tools from autumn and other cultures. This saguaro was in my front yard, and I actually used a stick to knock down those 3 fruits that are in my refrigerator at home. And I was going to bring today, so I apologize. But this is, if anyone's been around Tucson, you'll see this is the height of the season for the saguaro fruits. Probably most central to, I guess it's a good word now, cactus craft, is a couple, Chepa and Domingo Franco, who in the 1940s started making these little figures and also other things that I'll show you in a minute, but it was Domingo Franco was gathered saguaro for a man in Tucson who was not mentioned, but he was one of the men who was making these little the stagecoach lamps, particularly. And so I think the Francos thought, well, you know, they can do it, we can certainly do it. And so there's a lot of these. We have a nice assortment of the figures in our museum. The one on the left you can see is the cactus fruit picker, the woman with the long stick or kibbutz. And probably totally butchered that name and autumn, I love the fact that this is a second prize winner of the Pima County Fair in 1964. And so that was a time where there still were arts and crafts categories in the fair. I'm not even sure whether they still are, but in any event, on the right, is just a woman is on a horseback and her husband with his bow and arrow. And in reading the catalog cards, this is one of the beautiful things about having well-documented objects in our ASM collections is that the way it was described is that this was a couple that was on their way looking for a new home. And so I would, in my wildest dreams, I wouldn't have necessarily interpreted it as that. And here is Chep and Domingo's version of that wonderful stagecoach lamp idea. The thing I love is that the shape is hand painted by Domingo. He was a painter as well. He had a relationship painterly with the guy who's his name is Ted Gracia. And so there's actually cool pictures showing Domingo with Ted Gracia. Here's a picture that Larry was mentioning. This was Mr. Wood. You wouldn't even imagine that they could have been anything else, but this was from the Desert magazine in 1946. Yeah, sorry, I turned my microphone on, but I guess I didn't do it right. Anyway, so this is Desert magazine, 1946. And this is Mr. Wood at work that we've learned a lot about from Larry. Yeah, and this is a painting, Horse and Rider in the Desert by Domingo. And you can see it has a saguaro rib frame. The background, that's basically Cat Mountain and another one of the mountains just to the west of us here in Tucson. And I note on the lower right for more information, the Border Lore, which is a publication of the Southwest Folklife Alliance, has a whole little online exhibit about the Francos, and there's some wonderful family photographs that they have asked people not to share, but I encourage you to come and look to see what they have a much richer interpretation of the life of Chep and Domingo Franco, and then also other members of that family that kept the tradition alive. Other examples we have, there's an autumn carver named Donnie Preston. He used to come to our art fair, and this is another cactus fruit picker. And we have on the left ceramic Nacimiento by Laura Kerman of Topawa, who is a very prolific. She was the first autumn to use an electric kiln in her ceramic work, and she really loved making these little creches with a southwestern flair. And so there's the Nacimiento with the saguaro. And then on the right, Larry mentioned saguaro boots, and so Laura made a little cradle with a little doll inside and a little quilt inside of the saguaro boot. On the left, we have here we have two examples of wire. Autumn people are a number of folks are makers of wire art, from basketry to figures such as this. And so on the left, you have a steel and copper wire cactus picker, and then on the right, a blue saguaro made out of telephone wire by an artist named Callisto Andrew, who used to sell a lot of his he made little animals and all sorts of things out of telephone wire. It does make me wonder whether telephone wire, the different colors, whether that's still even something you can get, but in the 70s and 80s, he was quite prolific in making these little figures. Certainly, some of us have enjoyed through the years seeing saguaros on jewelry, and on the left we have two examples, one from a man named John Reno, and then it's a little pin, and then a belt buckle by Rick Manuel, who's perhaps best known as the developer of what we call Sonoran overlay, and the cactus figures very prominently in his jewelry. And then on the right, another James Fendenheim, who is kind of that go big or go home school of amazing jewelry art. And so he has his, the Desert Law, and I'm wearing a necklace of his, that he has this idea that the desert is the law. And I love that whole concept, but here he has a desert law, and he's mixed that with Papago ponies. And so that is very small necklace that we purchased for inclusion in an exhibit back in 2007. Other places that saguaros can appear is on basketry, and on one side you have this saguaro themed yavapai basket, and on the right a Margaret Sartoficio autumn weaver who is best known for these wonderful baskets that show the women gathering the fruit. So that gives you a little bit of an introduction into how our collections reflect some of the themes that Larry is talking about in the history, and there's a lot more to be said, and we'll at some point make a presentation that allows us to learn a little bit more about how Autumn have incorporated saguaros into their life and worldview.